Welcome to episode 35 of the Camera Shake podcast. As always, this is the podcast where we talk about anything and everything that's got anything to do with photography, making photos, making photography, or making videos. Actually, we talk about that occasionally.
We do.
Cool.
Occasionally.
This week, we've got a number of things. Obviously, if you're listening to the audio version of this episode, it'd be great if you could head over to YouTube, maybe click subscribe. That would help us out. We are trying to reach 100 subscribers because at that point, we can give our channel an actual name. At the moment, it's called something random. And we want to change that. So we need a few more subscribers. That'd be super awesome. Even if you're not into the YouTube thing, but if you could head over there and just click that subscribe button, that'd be awesome. Also, we are now on Instagram. It's at Camera Shake Podcast. Hit us up over there too, and the whole Twitter thing, and you know how that works. So, without further ado, let's get into this episode. And for today, we have a very special guest. For today, please welcome Mr. Moose Peterson on the show today. Moose, how are you doing? You okay?
Hi, guys. I'm doing great. How you folks doing over there?
We're cold and wet.
Yeah. Indoors too.
You know, it's kind of amazing. There's a lot of ups and downs to this whole current situation that's facing the globe. One of the things I think is kind of a positive is that more people are reaching out using technology, and borders have disappeared. And I kind of like that. So I'm grateful for you inviting me to come on.
Yeah, it's it's one of these things. Of course, you hear people very often talk about the negative side effects of the whole 2020 pandemic and everything. But the reality is, and I've mentioned this many times on this podcast, is that we wouldn't even be doing this podcast had it not been for the pandemic, because we found ourselves with not much to do, at the end of March. And so we figured, might as well, start a podcast. Because we had thought about this maybe 6 months prior, maybe like even a year before. And we were talking about the general idea. And, life's busy. So one thing happens and you just don't get to it. And so eventually it was time to get started.
It was.
Yeah.
I can really empathize with that for a lot of folks. A lot of my good friends are urbanites, for lack of better terms. They live in an apartment, a condo, a home with not a whole lot of boundary around it. And when you are a shut-in, more or less, structure can make a big difference.
Yeah, it became, it really became a really important part of our weekly lives, really, and originally, of course, we couldn't even visit each other, so we couldn't be in the same place when we started the podcast. We had to actually film ourselves and talk to each other via Zoom and cut the whole thing together afterwards. Now at least it's at the point where we can be in the same room together, which makes it a little bit easier.
It does. It's what a way to start a podcast as well. The hardest way to do it is not be in the same room. Yep.
Yeah, and we had to figure out how to do it really. To start with, we didn't really know how to. I don't know. We didn't know how to podcast, but we had to just figure it out.
Well, my question runs through my mind is, once life gets back to what was similar to before, and we could kind of walk around and be social again, how many bad habits that have, couldn't flourish because we couldn't be close to each other will come back, and how many good habits will take over, and what the change will be. I'm really curious to see how we as people or photographers evolve through all of this.
Yeah, that's true. I think there are a lot of things that if I speak for myself, really, there are a lot of changes that I've made, or that we have made as a family. For example, like we've gone down from having 2 cars to just running 1 car, and we sold that and bought a hybrid. So. Yeah, because we realized that actually we didn't need all of that. We didn't need to run 2 cars. We didn't need to have that impact on the environment and everything else. And so, it's we've already kind of made changes to our life. So when we come out the other end, these changes at least are going to be permanent. And I know it's the little things, but it's had a massive effect. Coming back to the podcast. Just for us doing this every week and actually speaking to other photographers in all sorts of different genres of photography has been incredible. Like, what a learning experience that's been, for us.
Excellent.
And getting people to come to the show like yourself is just, it's a real pleasure. And we wouldn't be doing this had it not been for COVID-19. So it's important sometimes to see the positives in something that could otherwise be extremely depressing.
Mhm. Yeah.
And those that have been successful, I think, are those that have embraced the change, if you know what I mean, and those that have adapted their business and what they do to be able to continue, at least in some capacity. A number of our guests have started doing a lot more online, as you can imagine, a lot more training type things, a lot more one-on-ones. So just to your point, Moose, I do wonder whether those photographers who have introduced those type of sort of areas to their business, whether they continue to do that when we're back to normal. I don't know. I really don't know. It's going to be very, very interesting to see.
What impact has the whole pandemic had on you? Like, because you're in Montana right now, right?
I'm in Montana. Yeah, we live up here, and we moved to the ranch in April. During the middle of the pandemic, we moved. So,
Right.
To be quite honest, we feel very fortunate and almost kind of guilty in the fact that the pandemic really has not adversely affected us. It has changed some things in that, for example, we're in a new place and we wanted to go out and we have some really great neighbors, but going out and doing summer neighborly things we could not do. But as far as we are concerned, Sharon and I and Maggie, our little puppy, we're here on the ranch. We kind of have it all right here. It's not still shooting as much as ever, not doing as much aviation because for a while that was kind of closed down a little bit or slowed down by the pandemic. But really, for us, we've been, like I said, very incredibly fortunate. We've been able to keep moving the ball forward, and an online presence and podcasts, like we've already mentioned, is something that's, I've been ahead of a website now since 1984. Back when you had to literally, you used the notepad on the Windows and you would type in HTML tagging and all that, and you had a book, so you'd look up. And I remember all too well, I've always greeted people with the word howdy. That's just the way I am. So my very first website, I remember putting in the tag to make it big and red and then make it blink.
Mm-hmm.
And the first people would go there, they go, that's the most obnoxious thing I have seen. Blinking howdy. I was so happy because I figured out how to do the HTML tag just to make it go blink. So a lot of that stuff we now take for granted, but that's just the fun. And as far as I'm concerned, what's really the cool challenge is to embrace change and make it yours.
You're really like this. You're a real trailblazer when it comes to embracing change. I mean, for those viewers or listeners who don't know, but you were really the first wildlife photographer to embrace the digital medium, per se,
on the planet. Yeah. And Sharon and I broke down a number of walls and walked through a number of doors with publishers with digital files. There was a brief period of time where we would take our slides and we would scan them. Back then they were called electronic files, and that was more or less kind of accepted because it was being done in the publishing houses already. But to take a file already electronically and that's created with a camera and put it on a printed page, that for about 18 months was, a real barrier. And we were the only ones on the globe that took advantage of that and started working with publishers. And then in many ways, it pushed our business to a whole nother level.
I remember this sort of briefly because I really only started to get into photography sort of semi-professionally, I guess, at the time when digital photography became the thing, or it had already been the thing. Obviously, technology wasn't quite as advanced as it is now, but I think it was digital photography was definitely very accepted at that point, and I think it was accepted generally that was going to be the future. But I remember people just before that, people saying, "Oh, digital photography, that's going to be the death of photography," or something like that. You know, and it's like, how many times have I heard that since?
Yeah.
About everything and anything.
Yeah, it's as a group, photographers don't really embrace change with a very positive attitude. There's a lot of skepticism to it. It's just our nature, I guess.
Yeah. So you're also a Nikon ambassador,
Mhm.
and you've shot Nikon for a very long time. So you stuck with that brand since. How long have you shot Nikon for?
Um, I have shot Nikon. I have to think about the moment. It would be since 1980. 1980.
Mhm.
It might have been 79. I'm pretty sure it's 1980. Uh, yeah, it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about. My cousin, who's a real smart guy, back when I was a little kid, had a Nikon F. So that would have been back around 63, 64. And we looked across the valley and I could see this object way across the valley, big in the viewfinder. And that just kind of like cemented the Nikon legacy in my mind. And it's, people always ask, why have I stuck with Nikon? Two main reasons. One, Nikon has stuck with me. And two, Nikon has always had the flash solutions that I need to be a visual communicator. A lot of people don't realize I can't really walk and chew gum at the same time. So working with a subject and dealing with flash, it needed to be a system that was clean and simple and produced the light that I wanted. And Nikon still provides that. So it was not really hard to be a Nikon ambassador. I just love the stuff.
How long have you been an ambassador for Nikon now? And what brought that about?
Yeah, well, ever since the program started, and I don't know, is that 9 years, 10 years now? And I just got the phone call. I mean, I distinctly remember sitting on the deck, and Mike called, a really dear friend and another. He's a great shooter on his own. Called and invited me to be part of the program. To be honest with you, I don't know why I got invited. I didn't do anything other than just kind of what I do. And obviously it has to be my photographs, because it sure can't be me and my personality, because sometimes it doesn't work so well. So, if you love what you're doing, right, and it comes through your photography, it affects everything in a positive way. Everything from just you looking at your images to your clients that keep coming back and asking, for more images. It's part of the process, which has peaks and valleys, but if you're creative and you have passion for it, you just keep working through all those.
In what way do you think generally the sort of industry has changed, or let's say call it the business of wildlife photography, if you want to call it that? In what way do you think that has changed since since you first started, or since the 80s or 90s?
That's a pretty darn good question. How's it changed? Well, the industry is a kind of a reflection of the world in itself, right? I mean, it's because we're visual storytellers. The most time we're going out and telling a story that's in front of us rather than creating a story. So when it comes to wildlife photography, it has had constant peaks and valleys. And right now, wildlife photography is getting up to one of its peaks again. And what I mean by that is there's a period of time, and it's probably happened half dozen times so far in my 40 years, where wildlife photography just wasn't popular with most photographers. So when most photographers are not shooting, then there's a real need for those photographers who are. And then when it's hitting a peak, there's a lot of photographers out there. And keep in mind, there's some really phenomenal wildlife photographers out there that people don't know about. And that's partly because of the photographer's fault. They're not sharing their images enough. They're not getting involved in the business enough. But there's a lot of really excellent photographers out there, and there's still the market for that. The problem is, at least in my opinion, is that a lot of photographers in the last few years have really gotten caught up in the instant gratification where you post it and you get all this love from people on the different platforms. The problem is that that love, while it's instant, doesn't pay bills, and it often does not instill solid craftsmanship and professional business practices. So that's still kind of lacking. The editorial market is still out there. It's still a place that's looking for more and more content. And this past year, with more and more people stuck literally at home, the need for that content has really increased. The photographers filling it has not. It's an interesting void. So that's kind of the scenario that's been going on for 40 years that I've been into it. We have lived forever, it seems like, in the editorial world. This last year, I have slowed down a bit because doing other projects, but it's still out there waiting for people to, basically embrace their fears, because a lot of people just don't like to be rejected. And that's why I think so many embrace the platforms online. Because rejection anymore is just figured out to be a troll, and so it's kind of like blown away. But when you send it into a photo buyer at some sort of editorial content, those people know what they're talking about, right? And that's where I've learned so much of my photography skills, is those people communicating and saying, this works, telling the story, and this don't work. And the don't work means you don't get a paycheck. And if that's how you are making your income, like we are, you listen. And a lot of people are afraid of that rejection rather than embrace it.
Within rejection, there's always an opportunity to learn. I think that's one thing that
if you step through that door, a lot of people are afraid to ask. I mean, in all honesty, when you're a creative, whatever your genre is, be it music or writing or photography, and you put your heart and soul in something, and then somebody stomps on it, you got to have a little bit of cojones to say, okay, why did I suck? And then listen to that, and then embrace that, and then remember that next time you go out. That's a lot for a human being to deal with. It really is.
Isn't it funny though, when you get rejected, and then maybe a couple of years later you look back at those shots and you think, yep, I can totally see what they were saying back then. Absolutely right. Because you, as a creative, you also develop over time. And of course, and I know this because both Nick and me have a background in music. And I remember when I was a kid and I was like learning how to play the guitar, I would practice something to the point where I thought it sounded really great. And then I would record myself. I would put the tape in a shoebox and listen back to that tape 6 months later. And what I thought was like the best thing in the world, when I recorded it 6 months later, it really sucked. It was terrible. Then of course, you develop and your ears develop, and over time you get that that sort of you get a little bit more objective, and you can take that step back and listen to it with different ears, and then you realize actually it wasn't so bad, it wasn't so good. And I can see that with photography as well. I recently looked back.
But here's the good thing about that, right? People always, are worried about either you can say burning out early, or, somebody says you're the greatest, but you got to realize that you're not, because you just look back at your own product, like you just talked about, and you realize that, tomorrow you're going to be better. Doesn't mean you're going to be substantially better, but you'll be better at what you're doing as long as you keep right foot, left foot. And so in a year, you're going to be better too. And that makes everything that you photograph brand new, because you are now bringing a new person to that photograph compared to just maybe days ago.
Yeah. Again, coming back to where we started this conversation about, starting up new things during a time like this pandemic. And, as part of this is, I think, this is certainly true for me, and I think I can speak for Nick as well, is that through speaking to different photographers, it's motivated us to try different things and to try new things. And, we've, like, the learning experience has been immense. Like, we went to a place called Brighton, which is a city by the coast, yesterday to do some street photography, which is not something that we normally do, but we thought, Yeah, it's a nice day. Let's do it. And it really was a learning curve, right?
It was a learning curve, and God, it was fun learning.
Yeah, it was fun. It was super fun.
And that's what people forget, is it's fun to learn new things. It's fun to get feedback from someone and implement that feedback. You don't necessarily have to agree with it up front, and you may not, particularly if you're quite protective and, hey, you've got a bit of pride going on there. But just try out what they've recommended. If you still don't like it, okay, that's cool. That might be partly a taste thing. It might be that you visually, or if we're talking about music, using your ears, you can't quite hear that yet, but you will try it again in 6 months. And this is it. But Moose, one thing I wanted to ask just while we're on this topic is, a lot of our listeners and viewers may, might be pro, might be semi-pro, but a lot of them will be hobbyists as well, and are using things like Instagram to just post their work. If you were to give those photographers one piece of advice right now about getting their work out there and not just getting the love, so to speak, from your followers and whatnot on Instagram, what would you say to those people to do?
That's a really great question. It doesn't have, as far as I'm concerned, a simple answer.
No.
To be honest with you. When it comes to sharing your photographs, it's a real personal thing. And if you're sharing them because you want to tell a story, then in that process, you'll grow as a photographer. If you're sharing just to make an impression or get likes, I don't think you grow as a photographer, not very quickly at the very least. So the sharing has to be because, as far as I'm concerned, you want to thank the person looking at that photograph for their time. That's how when I post something verbally, in text, in a photograph, is I want to say thank you for taking time to stop and look. And in that, you're going to get something out of it, be it small amount of pleasure, a little bit of information, combination of both. So the process of sharing a photograph has to come down to being one that's selfless. To me, it has to be one that is strictly all for the viewer and not for you, the photographer. If that makes sense to you.
It's a lot of sense.
Yeah,
I think that's
absolutely.
a great way of looking at it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure a lot of people do quite look at it that way, but so I hope people take that on board, because that's great advice, great info.
It's also always, you come across this discussion or this debate as to whether, whether one should share photographs, and then the whole kind of copyright discussion comes into it. And I know from listening to your podcasts and listening to you speak, I know you're really a proponent of really sharing photography, in general. So, what would you say to people who worried about the whole copyright issue when it comes to
Well, photographers always have something to worry about, right? I mean, the list is huge.
Yeah.
And you have a couple of options. You can worry about those things or not. Copyright infringement, it's happened to us more than once. It's part of the business. And do I worry about it? No, not really. To what end, right? What end? If you are worried about copyright, then it means all your photographs are going to stay locked up in a hard drive.
Exactly.
So then, as far as I'm concerned, you might as well just collect coins, because they're just going to be shiny things in a drawer that no one gets to see but you. To what it kind of on the same kind of thread, but opposite, is there's so many photographers I out see doing photography and doing things, as far as I'm concerned, are totally egregious to the critters or the environment. And those people do those things, and then they still don't share the photographs. So then what's that point? You gotta, it comes down to the photographer and really what floats their boat. For me, I am incredibly, incredibly fortunate. I get to go to places that I want to go to and see things that I have a desire. And if all things work out, I come back with a click or two that I can share that location, share that moment. for people who more likely won't have the ability to go do that. So I think right off the bat, because I'm so fortunate, that needs to be shared through those images. And copyright, it happens. It doesn't happen very often. I'll never forget watching John Oliver, and all of a sudden there goes my picture of a southern or Alaska sea otters on the screen, and I'm like, hey, that's my picture.
Yeah, wait a minute.
And I was sitting there, and they hadn't gotten permission to use the picture. And it all worked out. It wasn't a big deal, but I'm at the time I was in a hotel room with our oldest son Brent. We're working on a documentary, so we've been filming all day, and had just taken 5 seconds. Everything had uploaded, and we were going through it, and that came on. And I remember Brent, my son, going, "Wow, you're kind of calm about all that." And I said, "Hey, it's happened. It will happen again." And sent out the email, and it just, things move forward. You could either get really upset, or you just realize that if you share and as prolifically, especially like I do, that it's going to happen. You just deal with it, and it's just another part of the business.
I think it's a risk that you knowingly take. When you post your photographs on Instagram or Facebook or any of those platforms, there's just that inherent risk that somebody might see it and use it for other purposes. It's a bit like, my wife always says that she doesn't like what people say on Facebook, and I keep saying to her, "Well, why are you on Facebook then? You have a choice. Just don't be on it, wherever." But talking about your wildlife photography, that's I really want to get into that, because you really dedicated your life to education and the protection of the what do you call it, like the wild heritage.
Yeah.
And you've been doing that for a long time. You've been to many places, and you've been part of many biological projects. What would you say is what was your proudest moment, being part of any of those kind of?
It was over a period of time. There's a spot in the California Central Valley that has a lot of teeny species, and I was very fortunate to get in with an incredible group of biologist researchers. One of my mentors is part of that group, Dr. Williams. And it was right when digital was coming through. So a lot of my proudest moments, the proudest moment, is when my name was added to the recovery plan for the Central Valley as one of the contributors. And for someone who has no formal education, like in college for biology, to have been able to glean as much as I had from being in the field with these biologists and stuff, and be able to contribute because of my anecdotal collection of information through my photographs, and then be cited in that paperwork, it kind of meant that everything I was working for and still work towards actually had some merit. So, but a lot of people said, what got me started in this whole track of working with our teeny species, which I still do, but not to the same extent as I did for about 20 years. And I started off, it was one of those kind of classic mom stories. My mom ran a nursery school. One of her kids' parents was a biologist, became friends. This is right when I was starting off wanting to devote my life to wild photography. I started off brief period of doing fashion work, and then thought maybe I should, do landscape, realized that both those were totally not for me. And I'd been working with critters and been a bird watcher since I was 9 or 10 years old. So wildlife photography, life just kind of unfolded, and that's how I should be it. And this biologist, he lived where my mom was. I was 2 hours away up in Santa Barbara. He said, "Oh, I have a friend, contact him." I did. Mayton sat there, said, "We need a volunteer to monitor nests for a little bird called Least Bell's vireo," which back in the 1800s was a dirt bird. They were everywhere in California. It wasn't like you had to look. They were everywhere. And at this point, it would have been 1980. I feel like I'm in 1800s born, but anyway, um, there was less than 100 left in California, and there was a little population behind Santa Barbara. So I volunteered for the Forest Service, and I would go over in the morning, and I've always had this innate, sixth sense of finding bird nests. Finding bird nests for me, I don't know why, is real simple. So I would go and find these nests of the least bell's vireo, and I count the nests, count the eggs. And that's what I do in the morning. And then the afternoon was kind of like my own time. The Forest Service was paying for the truck and the gas, and I was putting in the time. So I sit there and I was photographing all the birds in this little riparian zone, found a nest I could safely photographed it. And literally my first text photo package, an article, was published the exact same month the least bell's vireo was listed as endangered. That very same month, some people saw that article, able to save some habitat, and the Fish and Wildlife Service, Carla, called me up and said, hey, you probably saved this bird from extinction. And that was just one photograph in one article that happened. And that, you could say, was a huge spark. It was a massive burden. It's a driving force. To know that one photograph can make that kind of a difference on our world. That's why I've always been such a huge proponent of sharing, of printing our images, giving away prints, and now putting images on the platforms we have available, because you have no idea the impact that photograph might have. On the flip side, I just got another email earlier this week from another person who said, when I was 7 years old, I just loved your photography, and now I'm a father of, 2 kids. And I'm like, oh, great. So I'm that old, but I had that kind of influence. So it's, it's a two-edged sword.
Yeah. Because I felt like that when I used to teach guitar as a full-time job. And I remember one of the kids I taught from when he was literally this tall. He now got a job for the same music service as a guitar teacher. So you gotta go, whoa, okay, I'm much older than I thought I was. I told you when you were a kid.
Yep.
So yeah, that's
okay. That's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, exactly.
If you think correctly, that's how it should work.
So what was your favorite animal or critter, as you call them? What was your favorite animal that you photographed?
Actually, that's a pretty common question, and it's one that's kind of hard for me to answer. I used to say it was, the one that would hold still for me. And then for a while, I would say, it's the one I'm currently working on. And now, I don't have a valid answer to that. Our wild heritage is incredibly vast, and they all have unique stories that make them special, at least to me. So I'm constantly in flux. The project I worked the longest with was the Salmon King kit fox. They're in the Central Valley. That just a marvelous little critter, very much endangered. That I was very fortunate to be there with my camera when many biological things unfolded for the first time that I could photograph it and then share. One of my favorite stories comes from just that. Back in 2000, I'm sitting literally in a pit over 100-degree temperature, D1 with a 400-2.8, looking at a hole in the ground, which is my specialty, when these little fuzzheads emerged, and they were 4 weeks old. It was the youngest that they'd ever seen pups emerge from a den. I was photographing away with a D1 and got back, and then I'm sending out these pictures to a bunch of biologists around the globe of this whole thing. And the response was, wow, you got, 4-week-old pups. That's just amazing. The response was, how come I was seeing these pictures when you just took them 2 hours ago? What's with that, Because digital was, in 2000, wasn't around, especially with a 402.8 and, what you could produce photographically look like what you're shooting or normally, would need, film for. And then after we got through the digital questions, then we got to, wow, you've shot 4-week-old pups. So the Kit Fox has always been there for me, and I've always tried to be there for it. But gosh, I love everything. There isn't a critter that I haven't photographed that I haven't fallen in love with, either for that period of time or still am.
But you've done this for so long. I bet you've witnessed a lot of changes in the environment since then, and the impact of climate change. Like, what would you say to somebody who just doesn't believe that climate change is real? Even
You're gonna bring up climate change. You gotta realize I think about it, look at it a whole lot different than what you might see in popular print.
Mhm.
The world is constantly changing. All right, it's not like it's frozen in time. So the climate is constantly changing, and what we have done is vastly accelerated that change and vastly changed its impact to where a lot of things are having a hard time as far as critters to keep up with that change. It wasn't like we started it. We just really accelerated it vastly, and it changed its impact. With that said, being a California native and spending so much time in California, we spent a lot of time the first 2 decades, Sharon and I, along with a lot of biologists, saving little pieces of California for this critter or that critter to which to eke out its living. Because they were kind of in California, they're very specialized. California still has this incredible biodiversity within its borders that it rivals places like Africa, all within the California border. There's just a huge biodiversity, but they all have very small niches. And when you remove that niche, they're gone. That's why they become extinct. So for 20 years, we worked very hard to save a lot of those spots. And those spots we're saving from human impact, be it degrading the habitat to completely obliterating the habitat. If you don't have David Attenborough, to sit there and take you through his lifetime of all he's seen, and if you can't wrap yourself around what he's saying, what you're seeing visually, and believe it, then I don't think there is a hope. And for me personally, then you're going to get in the dark area where, while a lot of people think there's a lot of chance of things coming back, and while I've seen things like the Palos Verde blue butterfly, something that was thought to be extinct for over a decade, reappear, I don't think that's going to happen on a vast scale for so many things that are and have disappeared, and things that are changing. And right now, we live, this applies to photography as much as anything else, in such a short-term gratification kind of window that planning for something to make a difference for 10 years out, you don't see that happening, right? To be really honest. So there's so much going on, and we're so focused in on our own little, very important issues that global issue, it's hard to anybody grasp. While I don't appreciate or really welcome people's anti-climate change attitude, I can understand it.
you find that governments nowadays, like today, are more focused on these issues to do with the environment, or do you feel like it's kind of gone the wrong way a little bit?
See, now you're getting into areas where this is why Moose's photography is so important, because you ask about him and things get, you could get on the because as soon as you say the word government, to me, the government is the people, right? The government is the people in those buildings are put there by the people. So the people don't get involved, then the government, how would you expect them to really do what we want if we don't get involved in it, right? So there's a lot involved in it. I can't point my finger to any one entity or government. It's a society as a whole, which is why I call it our wild heritage. It belongs to all of us. It doesn't belong to any one person.
Is there any particular animal that has so far eluded you completely? Like, is there something that you've always tried to like photograph and it's just never happened?
Yeah. I affectionately call it the bastard. It's the white-tailed hare.
Right.
And we don't have them right here at the ranch. I had them at the home there in the Sierras.
Mhm.
I spent this is the first winter I've not been on snowshoes chasing that son of a bitch, or the bastard. And they are here in the Bitterroots where I live now. Yeah. And I look forward to being able to get out and finding where they're at and see if I can't change that. Because I literally have two pictures.
Right.
One picture is it looking at me. The second one is it's hopping away. So I see is it's arse. So that has eluded me. And there's species I would love to photograph and spend time with.
Yeah. And
when I say time, I'm not talking about, a couple hours. I'm talking about a couple years.
Mm.
One of them would be the black-footed ferret. The other one would be the are critters that are fascinating to me, have a biology that is really intriguing, and photographically be really a cool challenge.
Yeah. Moose, what was that last animal you said there? We had a little connection issue just for a split second. What was the second one?
Swift fox.
Swift fox. Mm-hmm.
Really not well known. It actually lives right up the road, and I had tried for years to get in with that project without any success. So yeah, maybe now I'm a local. I might get more success.
How does more to the point, does your approach to wildlife photography change based on the animal that you're trying to shoot? Wait, I'll rephrase that. I don't want to say animal you're trying to shoot because that doesn't come across particularly well, does it? So the animal you're trying to photograph, does your approach change?
It hasn't.
Okay.
Actually, my approach has been the same since day one. First and foremost, I don't think any photograph is worth sacrificing the welfare of the subject.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard enough for them without pressure of a lens and a person pushing them. So that very simple thing is I let the critters come to me. So I do my homework. I do the basics still that I've always talked about. I read all I can in the scientific journals from those who are trained professionals at observing and writing down what they see. And then I do watch what I can as far as video movies, knowing that a lot of it has been contrived. It's not... I sat down and looked, here comes an ape, with a branch grabbing, a lot of that stuff is, a bit on the nature fake side. Mm-hmm. But I do watch how the critter reacts to the camera, how it reacts to the environment, how light reacts to it. And I put that all somewhere back in the subconscious. And then I go out. Like I tell people, the one thing I'm the best of in this whole planet is sitting on a rock and staring at a hole for 18 hours, waiting for something to happen. And I have absolutely no problem doing that. Being entertained by watching the world unfold in front of me keeps me there. And then knowing I'm going to get skunked, as in come back with nothing, I've done that. I still do that. That's still part of the process. And that, I get skunked as much doing aviation work as I do wildlife work. So it's part of the process, and it just makes when success happens that much sweeter.
Mm-hmm. I think you really have to have a real passion for wildlife and the outdoors, and in order to really invest this much into creating those images and and then developing the patience and the what would you call it? Like the sheer ability to sit for 14, 18 hours and look at a hole in the ground.
Well, people always think I have a lot of patience, and I just always tell them, just ask my two sons. I don't have patience, but the passion to sit there and watch is, infinite as far as I'm concerned. And I can be honest with you, I'm here at the ranch, and I have projects that I need to be doing, and I have absolutely, I blow time just sitting here watching the critters. We came here and I did my usual thing, is putting out boxes for them to have a place to live and food. And I built my first water feature, which is a little like 15 square foot pond. It's very shallow. It's only 3 inches shallow deep, but there was nothing like that in this area. And instantly these critters are sucked in. And so I literally have one white-tailed deer that when she sees me walk out the door, she runs over to me. I've got birds at the wazoo. We have 54 species already we've seen here on the property. So getting stuff done is challenging. You just stop and I just watch them, and the flow of life intrigues the bejiggers out of me.
Yeah. Do you get distracted easily when you see like an animal go to oh?
Oh yeah. The one of the common comments that comes to me is, where do I find the time? And if people really saw me and saw how much you could say I waste time just sitting and watching and just thinking through what is happening in front of me, they would really wonder how I get anything done.
Do you come across or have you come across any animal that you hadn't seen before that you can't identify?
Can't identify, no. Might take me a little bit to identify, yeah. Some birds, I don't, I've seen a lot of birds, some of them very briefly. So when I see them the second time, I have to think about it. But it comes to little mammals, because I do a lot of work with mice and gophers and shrews and stuff. It takes me a little bit of time to key them out. I mean, to properly say this is, this particular shrew.
We just had a little connection glitch there again for some reason.
It happens. And it kind of always makes me chuckle. People get so impatient when, not you folks, but some get very impatient when we have a glitch in technology in this. And, I've done presentations for decades. And I remember like when the table of a leg on a table gave out, and I'm in the front, and I see my projector sliding off this table as the table goes off. And I'm going, and I run back and I catch the projectors before they fall off the table. I've had screens come unravel during a presentation. I've had sound systems go with big puffs of smoke. So, this thing of perfection, I don't get it, because I've never ever witnessed or experienced perfection in my career. So I don't know why people think it's going to happen now.
I always have to remind myself that, when I was a kid and anybody told me back then that one day you'd be able to talk to another person in real time, like somebody who's on the other side of the planet, and you can have a conversation and actually see them, I would have said, that's total science fiction. That's never going to happen. Not in my lifetime. And then there was Skype,
Well, for me, it's even so right now I'm talking to you via Starlink. Mm-hmm. So I'm beaming literally from my house to a satellite to wherever to you guys. And I remember, because I'm old, like I mentioned, when I've done a lot of work with people in England. My only stock agency is there in London. And I remember back in the days when we would mail via post images, slides to England for all this process. They didn't even go by plane. They went by boat, So this whole thing, I'm the guy that looks at that Epson P7000. I'm still going, how's that print? How's that print? How's that print? Because it's just amazing to me.
That's phenomenal. So let's talk a little bit about your aviation photography, because it's the other thing that you do. And I was looking at some of your aviation images only last week, and it's what immediately strikes me is that photographically it's such a different style. And of course, on one hand, you might say, well, it's photography. Photography is photography. But it's this, I always get that sense when I look at your wildlife images that there's a really natural sort of look about it. They don't seem, when you look at wildlife images on Instagram, you get a really good idea what like over-processed imagery looks like, if you know what I mean. And I know this is very different when I look at your imagery. And then, when I look at your aviation imagery, they're really so perfect. It's like how do you create those images, particularly when you're photographing these planes in flight?
Well, I appreciate the kind words, but actually, it's easier than you think.
Mm.
Um, so aviation for me is a combination of landscape and wildlife photography. The plane has to live somewhere, and that's the landscape. That's the background in the picture, and the plane itself is the critter, the motion, the story. So and it all comes down to the one simple thing called light, right? That's what photography is all about, is how we write a story with that light. Now, the aircraft itself, I've always been an engineering nut. I love watching and looking and how things work. So you got this steely thing, or in some cases wood, that breaks the bounds of gravity and it can do what it can do. It does it in each aircraft does it in a very unique way. The flow of air over a wing is kind of, the basics, but each one does that a little differently. And understanding that, again, just knowing your subject, it's not hard for me to then photograph them. Just watching that light and watching that engineering, magic come to life.
How did you get into that? Was it just literally just a matter of being interested in it, and that drew you to shooting it, or was there another driver to that?
People give me a lot of credit to being this genius to figure this stuff out and doing it at the right time. But yeah, there's no genius here. It's all luck. It just so happened, I have a father that was a World War II and Korean vet. He took me to air shows. He flew. The bug was set in me long ago. I've always loved it. Never thought about it as a photographic pursuit, though. Then when the Nikon D3 came out, at the same time, a good friend of mine with Nikon was at the Reno Air Races, which was just literally a 3-hour drive from our home. And Sharon and I said, yeah, we should go do it someday. And we never, made it a priority, which bad habit. This particular year, Scott was there, and I said, hey, if you can get me in, I'll come up and volunteer, and I'll help people understand the new D3, because it had a lot of incredibly new technology. I did. I went up, did all that. D3 is hand holding a 500 f4, panning with something moving in the air, birds, right? So just different kind of feathers. So getting sharp images was not a challenge for me, especially without cropping. What you see is what I don't crop in post. It's what you see is what I shot. That's always been there with me. It's nothing new. And that very first year, put in images like, you're supposed to, and then I got the poster. So it was like, wow, I'm 50 feet from something going 400 miles an hour photographing, and it just all clicked. And just using the same basics that I always have, it just propelled me. Now, fortunately for me, I lucked into meeting another dear mentor who's no longer with us. And Bob, one thing that he did for me that up to that point in time I would never do, and he instilled in me the fact that this is the guy who restored 2 Super Corsairs, an incredible person, human being. And I said, I love your plane. He goes, well, they're not my planes. They belong to everybody. I'm just a current custodian. And so I share it with everybody. And from that, I took that what I was doing needed to be shared. So everything I've ever done with aviation has been shared with Bob in mind.
I know you produced a film called Warbirds and the Men Who Flew Them. Can you tell us a little bit about that project? Because that sounds extremely interesting.
Well, it was Scott Kelby has been a dear friend forever. He's just a great guy and human being. And Kelby One puts out a lot of really great classes. I've been fortunate to do a number of them. And Scott and I were talking, and I said, I really would like to do this documentary, which Kelby One had not done to that point in time. And it was my second one. And I was very fortunate at the same time to be working with the Texas Flying Legend Museum, incredibly gifted a group of pilots with some amazing aircraft, and with the support of Scott Kelby and then the chief pilot, Warren, who's a really dear friend of ours. I simply came up with the idea, and you got to understand that I come up with a lot of ideas. It's kind of like what Einstein says. We all come up with 5 great ideas every day. We just don't act on them. And I learned that long ago. So I have, if you look around, I mean, I have Excel spreadsheets for all my notes just to find them all, because I've constantly come up with ideas, and this is one of them. I wanted to celebrate flight. I want to celebrate this museum with their aircraft. And most importantly, I want to celebrate the men behind them, the men from, the World War II, the greatest generation, because they did so much to give us the freedoms to do a Zoom today, for example. So how could I do all those things? I wanted to take pictures of aircraft. I wanted to fly them. I want to talk about these great pilots today, honoring those gentlemen, and I want to honor those gentlemen. From that, came up with a script. Very fortunate that the museum was picked up the cost for flying all those aircraft, had a home base where I had all those vets available. And then Scott brought in the very talented crew, in which created, Warbirds, the men who flew them. The opportunity that Scott and Warren made possible to make that documentary, and then the fact that I had all of the vets at this event that I could sit there and interview for that presentation. And almost all those vets I had already known. They were already people that were friends, associates. So having that all at one point made that whole documentary happen. And it's a documentary that's had quite a longevity. And I still I got just a couple of days ago another note from somebody who had seen the Warbirds and Men Who Flew It, and was very much touched by it, and was reaching out because of their father being a World War II vet. And sadly, almost all those vets, as far as I can remember, all those vets but one has already passed. Mm-hmm. So it's the whole thing, the aviation, it's part of why we're able to be here right now. And it fascinates me just like critters. I mean, the fastest airplane that was back in the 30s was designed by a farm boy who never flew until he built that plane. And he got inspired by a plane that he's seen barnstorming. I mean, that's the power of visuals to me, that you can change the world. And I think it's a story that more people need to understand.
Where could our listeners find that documentary to be able to watch it themselves?
That and many of my classes are on Kelby One. So KelbyOne.com.
There's another class I came across, another class of yours on Kelby One, which all has to do with photographing Yosemite.
Okay.
And that really struck me. I might actually sign up for that class myself, really, because my wife and I we went to Yosemite on our honeymoon, and and that was quite special because I've always been really a fan of black and white photography, and I've always been a fan of Ansel Adams, and being there in Yosemite, like where it all happened, was for me, from a photography point of view, was quite a thing. My wife, not so much. She was really into the photography thing, but it's just like one of these special places, So
Yosemite has that kind of allure. Most people don't realize that Yosemite is there because of a photographer. This photographer, Watkins sat there and took a whole lot of photographs that went to Congress, and that's how it got actually made into a national park.
Yeah, that's right.
And as a good friend of mine used to say, if John Muir didn't have the foresight to preserve Yosemite, we wouldn't have it to enjoy today. Yeah. And the question is, do we have the foresight to save what we have today for future generations?
How did you first get involved with Kelby One?
It would have been the second ever Photoshop World. Mm-hmm. At that, Nikon had a big presence. And so at the same time, we had what was called Digital Landscape Workshop Series, one of the most successful photographic workshops that ever came. And it started back in 2001, and it was there to help people, move from film to digital and understand that not much had really changed, just went from analog to digital. Everything else was kind of the same. And my co-instructor, Vincent Versace, was at that time very much in with Epson and Nikon. And he said, you should come to this event, it'd be good for you, and expand stuff. I went there and went up to Scott and said, hey, hi. And he goes, who are you? And we talked briefly. And then me being me, I can be pretty persistent. I kind of followed up. And Scott and I became fast friends and have been ever since. He's just a marvelous human being. And he's always been a very supportive person of Moose and Sharon. So I've been with him ever since. And that's a long time now. It's almost 20 years.
One of the most fascinating things about that platform, Kelby One, for me is just to see the sheer talent that he managed to accumulate there. We spoke to David Williams only a few weeks ago, and that was in terms of landscape photography, that was just another kind of eye opener. I think for both of us, really,
it really was, yeah.
Because landscape photography is not really it's not where we come from photographically. We I'm a commercial photographer, so I do a lot. I photograph people predominantly most of the time, but of course there's always a great interest to expand and to get better and to try out different avenues, and to try out different things. And very often, of course, over time you build up these preconceived ideas of what a particular type of photography might be like. And it's very interesting when you speak to somebody who has, this wealth of experience, and it just shatters everything that you thought was true, in your own head, sort of thing. And you kind of go, you know what? Let's just forget about all that. I need to get into this. I need to actually give this a shot. And more often than not, I think we're both realized that, it's really well worth doing, and it's extremely beneficial, because a lot of the stuff, it's interesting. A lot of the things that we did yesterday when we went out on our little street photography trip, I'm already thinking to integrate some of that into some of my portrait work. So there's a lot of crossover in that, and that never occurred to me beforehand. So it's a really interesting experience. And what you said earlier about when we were talking about aviation photography, and you said it's basically like landscape photography with a plane in it. That was that actually was something that hit home. Both Nick and me started photographing cars during the pandemic. We couldn't photograph any people, obviously. So we started photographing cars, and it was super fun. We learned a number of new techniques to do this. We light painted and did some long exposure kind of imagery and stuff, and it was really, really fun. And it wasn't until we spoke to an automotive photographer, he said, look, automotive photography is like landscape photography with a car in it.
But when it comes to cars, you've got one of the best in the world right there in London, Tim Wallace. You should check him out.
Yes, Tim Wallace. That's the name I've come across. Absolutely, yeah.
He's just brilliant and just a great guy.
Yeah, it's in fact we're always asking our friends and our guests on the program to suggest somebody else to interview. Tim Wallace would certainly be somebody who would be very interested.
Tim would be a great resource for you.
Yeah.
Tim, Moose said you must come on the podcast. Yeah.
So what is your plan for, I was going to say for the rest of 2020, but we're almost at the end of 2020. What's your plan for 2021?
It's not anything different. We've still been operating like we did in the pandemic. We'll do some more workshops. We call adventures. I have some classes to create for Kelby One. Have a new documentary to start filming in April, and hopefully start another one next fall. So it's not much grass grows underneath my feet. I'm constantly moving and pushing things forward.
What are the sort of working conditions like at the moment? over in the US. Do you find is it relatively straightforward for you to get on with your projects, or is the whole pandemic making it quite difficult at the moment?
It's not. It hasn't made it quite difficult at all.
Mm.
It's it's, to be really honest, you wear a mask, you wash your hands a lot,
Mm.
and you stay a little bit distant from people. So I might use a little bit longer lens than I did because I like to shoot with wide angles with working with people and projects to relate the background with the person. But no, it hasn't. I guess the one challenge is the fact that so many eateries, you can't have a big group at the table, and a lot of them, especially right now, inside dining has now been shut down again. So it means eating more meals in a vehicle or something. So it's like any other challenge that we've gone through many challenges, and you use your common sense and you suck it up and you keep moving it forward. And that's just the way that I am. It's what else you can do? You can't just sit and be a lump on a couch because that gets you nowhere. So you get up and keep going.
Yeah, Netflix can only take you so far. That's what we've realized.
Yeah, it's not really people always ask me about sports. Like, I don't have that luxury of time. I don't follow sports, and a lot of stuff that's people talk about binging, I haven't seen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, weird. In the UK, when the first lockdown happened in most of the beginning of April, something like end of March. Yeah, end of March. It was really quite extreme. It was literally full on lockdown, and nothing was happening anymore. Schools were shut. Businesses were shut. Everything was just shut, and that literally forced you to stay at home because you weren't really allowed to go outside either. So that was extremely tricky. And so you were almost forced. To start with, it felt like you were almost forced to basically just sit and do nothing. And something interesting happened. A few weeks into it, we used to get messages from friends and other photographers, both kind of, both enthusiasts and some professionals, saying like, I haven't picked up my camera's still in the back. I haven't picked my camera up in 4 weeks. And, and we thought, well, wouldn't it be a good idea to just create like a group, like a Zoom group, where once a week we meet up, we talk about it. Everybody seems to have the same problem. Maybe we come up with some creative ideas of stuff that you can do. I mean, even if your main gig is to shoot in the studio, maybe there's stuff that you can do at home, ideas that you can come up with just to kind of get the creative juices flowing. And even if, and at the time, I think we were allowed out for an hour or something like that. It was really draconian almost. But even if that's all you can do, you can go for a walk in the park or something, take your long lens, and if you've never shot birds before, photographed birds before, then maybe this might just be the time, and that really turned into almost like a little community of people. And I think it helped to, in its own little way. I think it helped people cope with the whole thing a lot better, which is really, it was
quite a number of people, I think, actually took that advice on board and got out and got their camera out and did something different. And like you say, they kept creative and probably learned something new at the same time.
Yeah, because we would every week we would talk on Zoom about different things that you could do, different ideas, and some of the work that came out of that was actually nothing short of astonishing. Like finding light pockets in your house, photographing animals in your garden, and and then every week we'd hear stories about like, hey, I lay in there for 5 hours and I try to get that darn bird, or something like that, or and it was really, really good fun. So
excellent.
So it's just it goes to show that there's always something that you can do, even when it seems like you're being somehow restricted. But and very often it's a good time to maybe just take a step back, take stock, and figure out how to do things differently, and maybe that's for the better in the end.
As long as you have light, you have photography.
That's right. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. That should be the title of this episode.
I think so. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, great. Moose, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I know that a lot of people in my local camera club will absolutely love watching this episode because there are a lot of wildlife enthusiasts. Thank you so much to agreeing to come on this podcast.
Well, thank you for asking me. I've totally enjoyed it. So very much appreciate it.
Absolutely. And we wish you all the best of luck for 2021. And we're really looking forward to seeing more of you and your photography.
And just for our listeners, Moose, can you just remind all our listeners what the name of your podcast is so they can go subscribe and check that out if they haven't heard it already?
Moose's podcast. I keep it simple.
Love it. Love it.
So if you're interested in listening to Moose's podcast, you will find all the details and the links and everything in the description. And again, if show some love and head over there and subscribe and give it a nice star rating. And whilst you're at it, if you are listening to this on Apple Podcasts, you can scroll all the way down. If you're on the show page, scroll all the way down, and you can leave a review. I think is what they call it, isn't it?
A review and a rating.
That's right. That would help us out because the more reviews you have, the easier it is for the show to be found. That's how they do it this way. So it would be really phenomenal if people would leave a comment. Yeah, it'd be great. Oh, the other thing, before I forget, we always shout out a listener. So if you're the person listening to us in Durban, South Africa, is that how you say it?
I'm going to go yes.
Okay. If you're the person listening to us in South Africa, please get in touch. It'd be amazing just to see who you are and what you're doing when you're listening to this podcast. It'd be phenomenal. We always do this. We always shout out some listeners. We have a little, like in the analytics thing, there's a little map, like a world map, and you can see where people are when they listen to the show. And it's since we started this podcast, it's been really entertaining to see it grow and to see where people are when they listen to it. So we like to shout people out and to see if they get in touch and let us know who they are. So if you're in South Africa and you listen to this, then please get in touch, and hopefully we'll get a message from you at some point this week.